Hello again. All right, now it's time for us to talk about models. There's two main types of models to keep in mind. One, we have active record models. These are models, these are going to be classes which inherit from active record, and they're going to give us access to the database. These typically are there to represent the entities in the database. All right, so we'll have, a book model or a car model, whatever it is. We have, they represent our entities. Then we also can make all sorts of objects. This is object-oriented programming, and these objects are necessary for us to implement the other aspects of our application logic. The models that inherit from active record, these are primarily, again, this is like giving you access to the database. This lets you create, update, delete rows from database tables, all right? There's all sorts of other needs for computations and things, and we can end up creating other classes just for those purposes. As we will show, one thing to note is that the models that inherit from active record, don't just give us access to the database. We can also write additional methods for these models that basically enhance them and give logic and functionality to them. The bare minimum actually is to create some validations. These will be aspects to the models we'll talk about later, but again, they provide us a means to make sure we never store invalid data into one of these objects. Anyways, so let's get into actually some of the things about the active record objects, because you don't need me to tell you about other objects. That's what you've had in your previous courses. What is this about these models? All right, what is this active record thing? Active record is actually a design pattern, and then based upon that design pattern, this functionality in Rails was created to implement the idea of an active record. The big thing is it's all about object relational mapping. So our databases that we're using are, as you know, relational databases, okay? But our programming language, Ruby, is all about objects. We make these objects, the objects call other objects, and so forth and so on. But our database is all about, I've got tables and rows, and I'm doing joins. These are not the same concept. So there's a mapping being made here so that basically we have a way to go from our objects to the relational aspects of the database. There have been work in the past on creating, and probably still is, object-oriented databases where the databases store objects. They never seem to have really caught on. Relational databases are the workhorse of industry. There are all other sorts of databases also being created nowadays, but the vast amount of businesses you're going to run into are going to have relational databases, and we're going to talk to them with SQL. You're going to see that an object relational mapping still utilizes all the concepts of SQL that you've already learned. So that knowledge does not go to waste. That knowledge is really important to making this something that's not so hard to learn. Now, active record in Rails, though, has some rules about it that you need to know. Otherwise, your life is not going to go the way you want it to. All your tables that you make for the entities in the database, so the entity tables should be plural. I mentioned this before, but now it really is an expectation that you do this. And they should be in plural, and you should name them using snake case. So where you go all lowercase, and any words you want to have as separate words, you use an underscore. So that goes for whatever tables that you might have for your relationship sets as well. They should also be written in snake case. Okay. Then for the entity sets, for each entity set. It's the entity sets that in general are the things that we're creating models for. It could be possible to create a model to represent a relationship set that has attributes on it. But let's just keep it simple at the moment with our entity sets. Now for each of these entity sets, what we'll do is we will make ourselves a camel case singular model. So for example, in the database, I would have a lowercase books table. My model would be uppercase with a capital B, lowercase OOK, book. So this guy would be, in my model would be book. Like the notion of an object is going to represent a book. It's going to represent one row in the books table. It's just the way it is. All right. As I just said, each instance of a model represents, and these are active record models, represents one row in the corresponding table. All right. In Rails, the convention is to use ID as the primary key and I'm just going to say stick to that. Don't try to get fancy and go, well, I learned all about composite keys and oh, I see an option to say the primary key is something else. The reason I say stick to this is there's a lot in Rails built around this assumption that your model will have a field ID that is the primary key. And not only that, but the ID is going to basically be an auto-generated column. How to think about this and why might they have invented this for object relational mapping with ActiveRecord is as follows. Think back to Java, okay? And you're like, I've got a class and now I need to make an instance of it. I need an actual object. So you call new on that class name. And then it goes and does a dynamic allocation in memory. It allocates that object and returns a reference back to the variable. Okay, so we would have, often you'd make diagrams where you have, something like, I've got a variable book and it goes off to my object that's been allocated in memory. And I might have in there an instance variable called title and an instance variable called author. And so this was what was allocated. I've got these two variables. And when we allocated this, it's somewhere in memory. It's got some memory address to it. Okay, it's located somewhere in memory. The memory address, that's a number. All right, that number is returned and stored in the book variable, which we say it holds a reference to that object. All right, and then we draw it with this line. The notion, we use these lines because I refer to this, I hold the address of this thing to it, and of course we could change this and have it point to or refer to another object in memory if we wanted to, but this is what's going on. And it's basically, it's got a numeric number address there. All right, so why am I talking about this? Well, that's what we think about when we think about objects. Now, let's say we've got a model that represents a book, and we're like, I want to make a new book. Well, you're basically, where's it going to get stored? It's not often memory that we're thinking about storing it. We're going to be making this model so that it's stored in the database. So it's kind of like, and it's going to go to the books table in the database, and it's like, I need a new row. Make me a new row, please, with the following settings, and could you please give me back a number to refer to it by, just like in memory. Oh, sure, no problem. When this thing is set up, I've got it so that the ID is the primary key. I auto increment to get the next ID. I make that row, it's inserted for you, and I give you back that ID so that you can, when you've got your little book object in memory in Ruby, you can refer to that book. That's the book we're referring to. We always want like everything's based around this. Oh yeah, I've got a nice ID, a simple little number to say which of the rows in the books table am I referring to. So that's, yeah, you don't have to do this, but you can see the way it's sort of baked into the mindset. And so, yeah, when you try to do other things as primary keys, sometimes things just break or they get weird behavior. Let's avoid weirdness. Let's keep things easy. Always, if we can keep it simple, that's the best. All right, so we're going to have to always have our tables with an ID as the primary key. The good thing is that in the process of making those tables, basically when we're going to call these migrations to create the tables, we don't even bother to specify ID. By default, it's going to make ID as the primary key and have it be auto incremented. That's how fixed this mindset is. All right. You should note that all ActiveRecord models that we're going to make, these guys inherit from, now this is in at least Rails 6, probably Rails 5 as well. They inherit from application record. I noticed that this is different than what the course textbook says, because the course textbook is a little bit in the past with Rails 4. And application record inherits from ActiveRecord base. So basically, all these models, what we're doing is we're inheriting a huge amount of implementation code. It gives a whole bunch of methods. And so these guys, automatically, it's kind of amazing. They automatically, hook up the object to the table in the database. And how could it figure that out? That's where all that, be very careful. I used lowercase snake case for my table name. My model name is and that's a plural form, and my singular form is in camel case for my model. And based upon knowing that naming convention, this code knows how to go and look in the database. All right, if you disobey the convention, you will not get things to work. So besides that, there's also code, methods for basically letting us create, update, and destroy rows. Now I know we talk about delete a lot in computer science and delete in SQL. Convention really, there's both destroy and delete in Rails. If in doubt, you should be doing destroy. Destroy is sort of the Rails way of saying, I want to do everything Rails way, and then eventually we'll end up deleting in the database. If you say I want to delete something, it kind of means I want to skip all the Rails stuff and go straight to deleting things in the database. That's rarely what you actually want. Almost always you want to be doing destroy. So create, update, destroy. And well, of course, there's a notion of reading. You can actually get everything out. By the way, create, read, update, destroy is CRUD. These are the basic key operations. And so the object relational mapping here with ActiveRecord is basically giving us the CRUD operations. All right. So all right. We will use Rails to help us generate both the model and the database schema. We'll do them together, all right? We can certainly make a schema, and then we can make a model, and that model can, like we could make a database and have it exist and tell Rails that it exists there, and then we could have a model and rely upon all this automatic code. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to engage with Rails to say, I want to generate a model, please. And it'll go, fine, here's your model. And by the way, I've also created the code necessary to generate the schema for you in the database. And then we'll have to go in and edit things. It never is exactly the way we want it to, but it's far better to use these some of these tools to generate the code so that we don't make syntax errors, that it makes our life easier, that we know we get everything wired up. Because again, if we don't wire things up correctly, the whole thing comes tumbling down on top of us. The migration is what is going to be there to create that table in the database. And I said we're going to edit it. That's great. So let's go ahead and look at a real quick example of that. I want to talk about books. I think a real simple thing that we want is we want to have basically, we're going to have books, and we're going to give it, what are we going to give it? We're going to give it a title. That's it. So let's just give this guy a title. All right, and by the way, it will have an ID as a primary key. So we're just going to work with a super simple table right now. All right. So we would then, from our command prompt, we would say Rails, and a lot of this is going to be in the homework as well, but this just gives you a sense of how it goes. We're going to tell Rails to generate us a nice new model. Our model name is book. So we give the singular camel case form. And then what we do is we list our attributes that we would like it to create for us. So we say we would like a title attribute, and there's a whole set, you have to read the documentation, but there's a whole set of types that you can then say that your attributes are. We want ours to be a string. All right, so you run that, and it's going to produce, what it's going to do is will result in, it will create a migration. And a migration is code to create a schema in the database for us. A lot of these details will be handled in homework assignments, okay? So it's going to create a migration, code to create a schema in the database. Would be basically a books table. Yes, we write singular capital book. And it goes, oh, I know about how to pluralize words and stuff. And it makes a books code for a books table. Sometimes it screws up, and we have to, by the way, if it can't figure out how to do the pluralization and stuff, I don't think that's a good name for your table. I mean, for your model. Don't fight Rails. Go with the flow with Rails. If you fight it, you're going to lose. It's all about we've built it with all these, they call it convention, but it's basically, this is my lingo franca. You got to speak my language and we'll get along fine. Otherwise, I'm going to, you know, screw you over. So, yeah. If you were to see that it came up with a weird word or didn't know what to do, pick something else, okay? Likewise, by the way, in Rails, there's a whole bunch of reserved words. You should avoid naming things, classes, tables, all sorts of stuff with any of those reserved words. You can look these reserved words up on the internet. Now, it's also going to create a model for us. And we're going to find this guy sitting in a file called probably books.rb in his directory, again, homework. But it will look, only thing it will have in it for us at the moment is it'll say class book inherits from application record and then end. All right. That's pretty, it's like, what is it? Again, the big thing is it inherits a gigantic amount of functionality. We can go in and edit and add additional functionality to this model, to this class here. But what can we do with this as it is right now? All right. And so, yes, by the way, this generates, even though we didn't tell it about ID, it will generate ID. We don't bother to tell it about ID. It just says, oh, of course, you're going to want ID as an auto-incremented primary key for your entity, for your model. Who wouldn't? All right. What are the things that we can do with an active record model? Well, and all of my examples are going to be regarding this book model that we made. We could create a new book. All right, pretty easy. So this is in Ruby code that we would write. We would call, again, that defined a class. You just saw that. And then we go ahead and we say new. All right. All right. So calling on the class.new, we'll create a new book object, and we'll get it back here. And so we're going to have here our object that represents a book. Now, when we do new, it has not been put into the database yet. All right, so it hasn't been saved yet to the database. What we can do once we have it is we can easily access any of the attributes on that entity. So the table, you remember, we gave it a title. So yeah, we can go ahead and set the title here, for example. Let's say great book, Dune. All right, so we assign that, great. So now we have an object in memory, book, its title has been set to Dune. It's still not yet in the database. All right. Then we could write code if we wanted to save it. So we can say if book save. All right. This means to go and commit to the database. Go ahead. This will cause it to do an insert statement where the title is Dune, and we'll get a new row, and it'll get a unique ID back from which is the primary key. And this will actually then learn and know, ooh, I'm ID number 5 in the database. Okay, so if it's true, it means we had success and we actually were able to save it, and we'll get our new row. If it's not true, then we're going to have a failure. And I am writing comments in C or Java style. I should really be writing comments as Ruby style with the hash mark. Anyway, end. So that's as simple as that is. Create a new book. We can access and read. And voila, you didn't have to actually know any SQL to get this done, which is kind of nice. But nevertheless, it's querying where you really end up needing your SQL. If you wanted to do, you can also do new and save in one go. That's easy. You call create book is equal to book.create, and we give it title Dune. All right, so this statement, we would specify all the attributes we had as arguments to the create statement. It would actually go then and form a SQL insert statement, run the SQL insert statement. If it's a success, it tells us otherwise. It'll probably, I don't actually remember what it returns, or if it throws an exception, something. By the way, it's kind of fascinating here. How does this create method in Ruby know to take an argument title? Well, again, that's part of the whole notion of when it starts up and running, ActiveRecord is actually able to go and it looks and it knows about the schema, and it does what's known as metaprogramming. On the fly, it generates all of these methods customized to what's in the database. Very fancy stuff. All right. We can also query. Okay, so let's say we want to get all the books as a relation back. And this is important to note that what we have with ActiveRecord is that some of our commands will give us back an ActiveRecord relation where we can do other sorts of SQL-like commands on them. We could also then get out of it a set of book objects, okay? It doesn't give us a set of rows the way we've been working with the other Ruby SQL package. This is actually something that then we can program on, and we could do, you could run one relation and then you could apply a where clause to it to filter it and so forth. And then eventually you can iterate through it and get the books, as I'll show you here. So let's say I want to get all the books. I could call the class book.all, and then I can go ahead and use books.each, do book. So for all of basically the rows in the relation that's been returned here, I can go through, and let's say I just want to, for whatever reason, output the titles. I can do so. All right, pretty simple. There is a lot, though, more that we can do. We can absolutely write SQL-like stuff to query and get back results. So we can, as I say, you can write, and I'm going to put it in quotes because we don't directly usually write SQL when we use object relational mapping. All right. The important thing about this is that you need to always think about these as select star from books. Okay? The idea behind the object relational mapping when we're using it is we're always wanting to get a set, basically it's like a set of objects of the type that we're accessing from. If we're using the book model, we want to get back books. When we've been doing stuff in SQL, sometimes we produce result tables that are a combination of, let's say, the books and, users who've rated those books. And we produce a resulting table that gets output that has stuff both from the user's side and from the book's side. We don't do that here anymore. We're always like, I want books or I want users. And then you're like, well, what am I going to do? How am I ever going to do these joins? You can do the joins, and you'll be able to access objects via objects, all sorts of things. It's actually not that bad. But we will get out of the mindset of a sort of combination of data coming back from two tables. What we'll be doing is we'll be getting objects, and then we'll be able to access via the relationship sets other objects, okay? And we can go in both directions, all sorts of things along those lines. This is a little bit tricky to get over after having learned SQL. Don't worry, your SQL is a lifetime valuable skill, so it's not going to waste. So, but we can absolutely do something along the lines of books, and now we say book, and we go where? And we've got a title, Dune, okay? And this will find all the books who have a title equal to Dune. I'll get back a relation in there to do this. Or you could have done a query on the sort where you go book.where, and you go, you're actually write a little bit of what's SQL-like code, title equals, and just like the Ruby SQL gem, we use question marks as placeholders to avoid SQL injection. And then we could, you know, have our Dune, and it would go into there. All right. And this, you know, again, I hear I'm giving a string, but imagine I'm actually using a variable or something. Otherwise, I wouldn't need to be using the placeholder. I could have just written Dune in there myself. Anyways, it works like that. It's pretty nice. Great. Let's say you've got a particular object that you want. You know its ID. We want to, you know, get object by ID. That's easy. We can do book is equal to book.find, and we pass in, let's say, an ID. So this is basically where books.id is equal to 1. So find me the book whose ID is 1, and then give me back the actual, this is the actual object. It's a book object. We can access the title then. It's not a relation. It's not a whole bunch of books. By the way, keep in mind unless you're doing a find or something, you're always going to get a relation. So even if that relation only has one row in it, it's a relation. It's not a single object. So you have to be sure to then get back out the single book object. You can't treat the relation like a book object because it's not one. All right. You can also run direct SQL code. And again, the idea would be always you're doing some sort of select star. It's because you want books out. So you can run SQL directly. And so you can do books is equal to book.find by SQL. And then you can go ahead and write whatever your SQL code is. It's always a select star from books where title, let's say I want to do a like, you know, like I want to find books that have the phrase hi in them. Okay. So you can do this. You can, if you're more comfortable with a lot of times, just go ahead, do this, and this will then get you all of those books. Great. We can destroy books. We can delete them. So, you know, with a book object in hand or an instance of a book. So if we've got one and it's been instantiated and it relates back to the database, we can simply call book.destroy. That will basically, this will then run a delete for us to actually remove that row from the database. All right. Don't call book.delete because that'll get you in the habit of skipping out on any special Rails mechanisms. Get in the habit of calling destroy. We can also do updates. Absolutely, we're doing all the operations today. To update, we could, again, let's say we get ourselves a book and we do a book dot find by. We specify we want the book with the title Dune. And assuming there's only one book with the title Dune, this will work. I get that one single book back here. And then let's say I want to change the title. Well, it's not hard. I just treat it like an object. And let's say, I really meant to call this the Dune series for whatever reason. All right, so it's going to change the title. It has not yet written into the database though. It's only changed the object in memory at this stage. It hasn't changed the database. To make sure I change the database, I have to call save on it. This then will cause an update statement to be issued such that that row in the table that with this book's ID gets its title changed to Dune series. You can also call updates directly if you don't want to do that, and this is more like your SQL. And so I could, if with that same book in hand, I could call book title, and I'm going to change it, update it to be Dune series. All right, you can also do that. Great. Fabulous. All right, I'm going to pause here and then continue with models in a moment.